Meat. Should you be eating it? It's one of the most debated topics in climate conversations. Globally, livestock farming accounts for nearly 15% of all greenhouse emissions, with methane the most potent contributor coming largely from animals like cattle. Most of the meat that we eat comes from industrialized systems where crowded feedlots, heavy pesticide use, and grain feed dominate. These setups produce more meat for a cheaper price, but they also bring serious environmental costs, from soil degradation and chemical runoff to methane emissions. That's one of the reasons for the growing trend towards vegetarianism and the explosion of fake meat substitutes. And that's certainly an approach that works, but what I really want to know is if producing meat has to be so destructive in the first place. In the following conversation, I speak with Will Harris.
I love my herd as much as you love your dog or cat.
A cattle farmer who practices regenerative farming.
The farm is quite different from the other farms around us. It's quite different from what I did. I used to kill things for a living. Now I try to keep things alive for a living.
His focus is on cutting out pesticides, herbicides, grain, and hormones, instead raising cattle on grass.
I became increasingly dissatisfied with that model, the excesses of that model.
The claim is that regenerative agriculture promotes healthier soils, reduces chemical runoff, and draws down carbon from the atmosphere into the soil.
The cows were meant to roam and graze.
Plus, it could potentially reduce methane emissions by preserving beneficial soil microbes that consume methane.
I became for getting away from these industrial production methods we're using, but I also advocate against wasting so much food.
But can this approach truly make a dent in greenhouse emissions? Can we feed the world regeneratively, or are we stuck with the consequences of industrial agriculture?
Escaped Sapiens.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time because most of the guests I have on this podcast are research scientists. So in that regard, you're quite different to the average or the standard fare that I have here. So let's start with some introductions. Who are you and what's special about the farm that you run?
I am Will Harris. My farm in Georgia is called White Oak Pastures. The farm was actually founded by my great-grandfather in 1866, then run by his son, my grandfather, run by his son, my father, run by me all my life. I have two adult daughters and their spouses who are helping run the farm now. And they've got 7 babies on the farm that'll be the sixth generation. The farm is quite different from the other farms around us. It's quite different from what I did when I graduated from the University of Georgia and came back here to run the farm. My dad took over the farm post-World War II, 1946. He was born in 1920. And he is the generation that changed the farm, and he became, under his watch, it became a monoculture cattle operation. Post-World War II in this country, probably all over the world, but certainly in this country, we industrialized, commoditized, and centralized agricultural production. Under his watch, this farm became a very linear, that's important, very linear monocultural cattle operation. Prior to his watch, the previous 2 generations, my great-grandfather and grandfather ran the farm as a multi-species, vertically integrated farm. I should tell you a little bit about how that farm was run during that time. Can I do that?
Please.
Okay, so my great-grandfather and grandfather ran the farm from 1866 until 1946, 45 or 46. And they were very entrepreneurial, and they were fairly large operators for their place in point in time. They had a number of employees, and every day they got up before daylight and slaughtered something 6 days a week. It might have been a cow. It might have been 2 or 3 hogs. It might have been 100 chickens. It might have been geese or turkeys or goats or sheep, but they slaughtered something and loaded it onto a mule-drawn wagon, mule-drawn wagon, and an employee drove that meat or poultry about 2.5 miles up a dirt road to Bluffton. That's where I'm sitting right now. That's the name of this community. And they sold the meat. They peddled it. People expected them, and they would come out and buy a chicken or a ham or a whatever, a roast. And then on the weekend, on Saturday, my great grandfather, later my grandfather, would ride a horse to Bluffton and collect the money. It was a very vertically integrated food production system. This is before refrigeration, before internal combustion engines, before USDA inspection. But it was a highly efficacious food production system that fed this community. My dad took over the farm post-World War II. And under his watch, it changed dramatically and I think pretty rapidly. Under his watch, it became a monocultural cattle operation. Calves were born on the farm and raised to post-weaning, then shipped to feedlots in the West, where they were further raised and then later processed. Very linear. The first rendition was very cyclical. One of my dad's watch, it became very linear. And that's important. My dad ran the farm as a very linear monocultural cattle operation all his life. Was financially successful. He made money doing it. Not rich, but he was prosperous. I never wanted to do anything except run the farm just like my dad did. I went to the University of Georgia, majored in animal science, came home in 1976, helped my dad run the farm. It's a very linear cattle production unit, and we were profitable. We made money every year. In the 20 years into that, in the mid-90s, I became increasingly dissatisfied with that model, the excesses of that model. We can talk about that a lot. And I started changing it. And today, this is almost 30 years later, I'm still changing it. I'm still moving. And I have said, and it's true, that the farm in many ways more resembles what my great-grandfather and grandfather did than resembles what my dad and I did. But it's never been my goal to recreate that model. It kind of evolved into a partial recreation. I should say that we do not reject technology. You know, I've had 6 or 8 drones in my life. You know, we use we have an office full of people up here that are keeping books, using computers, and we embrace technology. But we try to limit the negative impact of technology. So many technologies have unintended consequences that are harmful to the land, the animals, and certainly the community.
So what was it that you saw in particular? Why was it that you were the one that made the change as opposed to some other farmer? And what was the particular thing that really disturbed you about the way things were run 25 years ago?
Well, I'll answer that. But first, I'll say I'm not the only farmer that made that change. I'm the only one here. There are a number of other farmers across the country that made similar transitions and did so successfully. I can name you a few of them. I'm not the only one, but there are not many of us. The excesses of those technologies were harmful to I think maybe the first dissatisfaction I had was around animal welfare. I really believed that my animal welfare was above reproach for years. I would have argued with you had you said that it wasn't above reproach. until I figured out that it was not. And then I was very dissatisfied with it. I believed for many years that as long as I kept my animals, only cattle, at that time, well fed in a comfortable temperature range and didn't intentionally inflict pain and suffering, that was very good animal welfare. It was above reproach. And then I realized it was not, that it's also important that the animals be given the opportunity to express instinctive behavior. The cows were meant to roam and graze. And the environment I had them in did not allow them to do that. I had them confined and fed them corn out of a trough. They were in dust when it was dry and mud when it was wet. And that's not instinctive behavior for cattle. Cattle won't graze. So I changed the way I do that. When I made that decision regarding animal welfare, it very quickly, almost instantaneously, occurred to me that my environmental impact was not good. I believe that the way my dad farmed, a lot of cultivation, a lot of chemical fertilizer, a lot of pesticides, etc., was great. And then I realized it wasn't. I could take a handful of soil, dirt from my field and go 20 feet into the woods and get a handful of soil. And it wasn't the same. One was a dead mineral medium. The other one was a medium that was just teeming with life. Some of it you could see, some of it you couldn't see, some of it you could feel. And so I knew that as soon as I realized it, I knew it was the tillage and chemical fertilizer and pesticides that was causing that. So I quit using them. And I'll say this, I went from making money every year to not making money for a period of time, years. But I'd been left with a paid-for farm, a little bit of money, and so I was able to financially afford to make the transition. And then we had some prosperity. Our timing in making those transitions was so fortunate, not smart, fortunate. I did not see a change coming and get ahead of it. It was not like that. I became unhappy with what I was doing because it was excessive. But we did make the transition very early. And I actually sold Whole Foods Market and Public Supermarket the first pound of American grass-fed beef that they marketed as American grass-fed beef. That was not smart on my part. That was purely fortunate on my part. And we had some really good years as a result of that.
For someone who has no idea about farming, someone coming from the city, they've never been on a farm, can you sort of lay out, just in practice, what is the actual difference between the industrialized feedlot and what you're doing now? So what are the numbers? What does it actually look like for a cow, birth to death, fork to plate, grass to plate? What is the actual difference?
There are a lot of ways to answer that question, and I'm not sure I know which one you're going for, but I'll start out by telling you that when I was an industrial cattle farmer, I was looking for something to kill every day. Every day I'd go to my pastures and I'd look for a side, homicide. Side means kill. Homicides kill humans. I was very good at using insecticides, herbicides, nematicides, all the pesticides. And I looked for something to kill because I was trying to maintain a monoculture of cattle on a monoculture of Tifton 85 Bermuda grass. And it was all about killing what was not cattle and not Tifton 85 Bermuda grass. If you were out there if you were a living being in my pastures and you weren't one of those two species, I felt as though you were harmful, and I wanted to kill you. Fast forward to today, I go to my pastures looking for ways to make things live. I truly believe that every indigenous species of plant, animal, or microbe that's in my ecosystem has a role. I don't recognize it. There are things that I don't enjoy much. Gnats, mosquitoes, snakes, poisonous snakes, on and on. But I believe that all those creatures have a role there. And whereas I used to kill things for a living, now I try to keep things alive for a living. I think that my job is to help maintain this ecosystem. This farm is an ecosystem, and that the profits that we live on is the bounty that the ecosystem produces. I think that when nature is allowed, the cycles of nature are allowed to operate as optimally as possible, it spins off a bounty. And I believe that bounty is wealth. All that coal and oil and natural gas in the ground? That's the bounty of nature. When the cycles of nature were operating optimally in the era of the dinosaur. And we've been living off that bounty since World War II. And I think that the cycles of nature today will yield a bounty, but we've got to make it healthy. The cycles of nature, we probably should talk about that. The cycles of nature are, to name a few, the energy cycle from the sun, the water cycle from rain, the microbial cycle, the mineral cycle, the grazing cycle. There's just many, many cycles of nature that operate independently, but also in unison together to generate a bounty. That's the wealth. Coal, oil, gas. Keep going back to that era. That's before we got here and started screwing things up. So with the limited resources that I have available to me as operator of White Oak Pastures, I endeavor to make the cycles of nature as healthy as I possibly can, to spin off as much bounty or wealth as it possibly can, so that me and the employees here can survive and thrive and prosper.
But surely the old system, the traditional system that people are using now, the industrialized system, you were probably making more money back then, or is that not the case?
It was certainly more consistent back then. The programs that Big Ag and the government and allow farmers to almost assuredly make a little money if they do things properly. And we've gotten used to that. What I do now has a lot more risk involved, has more upside potential, but also has more downside potential. And we've had years we lost money. Make no mistake. We've had years that we made what was considered to be a good amount of money for a privately owned farm in Bluffton, Georgia.
But so when it comes to the costs associated with running one of these farms, you're absorbing costs, right? Because this is why these agricultural practices came in. You use nitrogen fertilizer to boost your soil. You use pesticides to kill all sorts of vermin and things that you don't want. So you're incurring losses. What are those losses that other industrialized farmers don't have to pay for? Like what costs are you actually taking on board yourself personally?
Let's call it costs and not losses, but it's the same. But I think so. You're right. A pound of beef or pork or lamb or a dozen eggs from my farm would cost more than from a large industrial linear operation. It would. And I think it's because in the evolution of the large industrial monocultural operations, it's been efficiency has been the only criteria for success, more and more and more efficient. And I don't know that the cost of those industrially produced beef and pork and lamb and eggs and carrots or whatever is necessarily cheaper. It's just that they're spun off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's as large as Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts. It used to be a thriving oyster harvesting ground. And now it's a big dead zone. And it's a dead zone because of all the pesticides and chemical fertilizers that are washed down the Mississippi River. That cost was not borne by the people that bought the products that those farming operations produce. The cost of cleaning that up, if it ever gets cleaned up, will be borne by all of us. Not the pesticide producers, not the chemical fertilizer producers, not the farmers that used them. All of us will bear that cost. You know, probably more than anything else, I'm disturbed by extinction of species. God only knows how many species of plants and animals and microbes have gone extinct because of industrial farming. And those species had a role in nature. They were doing something. And they're gone now. And pesticide companies or farmers or whoever produced the products that killed, that drove those species into extinction won't pay it. We'll all pay it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea? Have there been studies done, or do you have any idea of what the true cost is for industrialized farming? You know, when we say that burger that comes from that industrial feedlot is cheaper than what you can sell, what is the actual cost? Is your burger, when we take into everything into account, is your burger cheaper?
I don't know that those numbers exist. I don't know how, you know, I'm a farmer, not a statistician, but I don't know how those numbers could even be collected. You know, there's atrazine in the polar ice caps. Not supposed to be. We produced atrazine. You know, does it hurt anything? Probably. How much does that cost? You know, I don't think anybody knows that.
But so one aspect that you mention in other interviews that I've seen that you've given is the quality of the soil on your regenerative lots. How does it compare? So if you look at the soil from 25 years ago when you had this linear system, when you compare that to today, what's the difference?
Well, I was not thoughtful enough to take soil samples 25 years ago to hold for comparison, but fortunately, my next door neighbor still farms the way I did 25 years ago. So it's a very safe bet that what he's got today is what I had 25 years ago. And my neighbor's soil is 1/2 of 1% organic matter, 0.5% organic matter. Mine is 5% organic matter, 5.8. So it's 10x more carbon.
Mm-hmm.
And carbon is not all that matters. You know, we have this simplistic view that it's all about the carbon, all about the microbes, or all about the minerals. It's not. It's very complex. But carbon is something that is fairly easy to measure. And we know that in the last 25 years, I have built my soil from 0.5% organic matter to 5% organic matter, 10x increase. And it's a serious safe bet that I did the same thing with the microbial health and the mineral and the total health of the soil. So let's just talk about the organic matter for a minute, since that's the one that we can quantify. 1% organic matter will absorb a 1-inch rainfall. So my 5% organic matter soil will absorb a 5-inch rain event, and my neighbor's 0.5% will absorb only a 1/2-inch rain event. Well, we get 5-inch rain events in the coastal plains of Georgia in 6 and 7. So we're able to, the soil is much healthier because we're able to absorb the rainfall that we get. You know, I'm not saying we don't need irrigation. I don't have irrigation. I don't have to have irrigation.
Hmm.
You know, we can, we just, the way we have farmed our soils with the tillage and chemical fertilizer, pesticides, has just been so debilitating, so damaging.
Can I ask, because this is something I don't quite understand, what is it about high carbon soils that allows you to retain more water? So my conception is that if you have healthy soil, you have insects and burrowing creatures which leave holes and aerate the soil, and so it can absorb via that pathway. Is that what's happening, or is it just literally the carbon in the soil holds onto water on its own? What's going on there?
No, it's just both those things you said. I mean, having the insect life in the soil, having the microbial life in the soil, breaking down carbon. The soil, let's just call it dirt, not soil. The dirt that we farm here is a mineral medium. And if you took a bag of marbles and dipped it in the water, it wouldn't hold much water. A high carbon soil is like a sponge. You dip it in the water, and it holds a lot of the water. So, and what you said about the microbial life, the insect life, that is equally as important. That's all part of it. I talk about carbon because it is far more measurable than determining how many earthworms you've got per cubic foot. I mean, you can do that, but it's certainly it's more onerous.
Mm-hmm. I suppose you could measure the density of the soil in some sort of some depth, let's say.
The density of the soil is very important, and of course the carbon in the soil is an indicator of that density.
So the other thing that I'm quite curious about here is, and something that I don't really understand, let's say you were feeding your cattle, you weren't doing grass-fed cattle, but you were bringing in, soy and corn. Then I can imagine you bring in that material, it passes through the cow and gets deposited across your fields. In my imagination, that would also deposit carbon on your fields. So what's special about, why is it that you want to go the grass-fed route? What does that really do for the environment as opposed to just bringing in corn and soy?
Now, you raise a good point. And bringing in corn, soy, other grains that would be palatable for cattle, it does pass through them and feed the soil. There's no doubt about it. It's the concentration to cost effectively manage those sorts of operations. We typically have a confinement operation in which they're shut up with great density and eat out of a trough.
Mm-hmm.
Then the feces and urine is in such great concentrations that it's actually harmful to the soil.
I see. So the fact that you're running on grass means that you need to spread your cattle over much larger areas of land, and that's the key component.
If you are land is probably the most expensive component of a cattle operation.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the most money tied up. That's not true if you're buying corn and feeding them in a very small area. It's true if you're growing grass on an expansive area. And the cycle is, it's very important that you allow the grass to mature and then rapidly bite it off and then allow it to mature again. Think about the herds of buffalo or bison that roam the Midwest and the West, so Southeast too, actually, but it was much earlier. those animals would, they're prey animals. So they would bunch together, be kept bunched up by coyotes or wolves or cougars or whatever predators were after them. And they move across the landscape, grazing it, very, very hard impact. Like go bite it off from here, very short. And then they may not come back for another year to that. So that allowed the grass to grow. All that carbon in the foliage and in the roots are greenhouse gases that through photosynthesis were turned into plant material. So that's how the wonderful soils that were natural to the Midwest were evolved over many generations, many centuries of grazing that way. We changed all that. When I took over the farm, we held animals in the same paddocks year round. So the grass never grew much, but it's okay because we were hauling corn or soy to them. When I changed, I took the confinement out, chopped the farm up into smaller paddocks and moved them. It's 60 to 90 days before they get back. And that's long enough here. In a different ecosystem, it might take a year. I'm in the coastal plain of Georgia, where we get 52 inches of rain a year and a lot of energy from a lot of solar energy.
You said that the main cost there is land, but if you own the property, isn't it cheaper to run off grass than to be buying soy and corn and bringing that in? How does that cost there stack up?
If you ignore the cost of owning the land, if land cost, depending on where you are, from $2,000 to $10,000 an acre. If you ignore that cost, but I can't ignore that cost. That's a real cost that exists.
So even in the poorest state or the poorest county in the U.S., the land is still not prohibitively expensive, but it's very expensive and the main component of what you're doing.
Almost prohibitively expensive. So let me explain that to you. Land is a non-depreciating asset. There aren't many. Land, precious metal, jewels, maybe art. I don't know about art. There aren't many non-depreciating assets, but land is one of them. It's the only one I know that yields a little bit of return. One of the greatest costs in a livestock operation is land, and it's an investment that offers very, very low return.
But this is what I'm asking, right? So is the cost primarily in the purchase or continued land taxes, or what is it actually? I'm not from the States, so I don't really know what the picture looks like. When you bear the cost day by day, what does it look like?
Primarily would be the investment in the land. There's an investment in the herd as well. We operate on, it's a little complicated, but white oak pastures. The home farm here where I'm sitting is 3,200 acres. I own about 2,000 acres of it, and I lease about 1,000. Then I graze about 2,000 acres of solar arrays that are not part of this farm. It's very close here. The land, you'll have to do the math, but land here is probably about $5,000 an acre. That's an arguable number, but that's not far. So you can see it's a tremendous investment in land. We've got about almost 3,000 cows in inventory right now. The value of those animals is $2,500 a piece. So it's just a tremendous amount of capital tied in. You're right. From a cost of buying inputs, what I do now is far more economically feasible than what I used to do. But the cost of the land and the animals and system is greater.
I see. And so one of the aspects that you talk about is you mentioned that you claim that you're able to sequester carbon, right? So I've even heard you say that you're carbon negative with the meat that you produce. And I'd like to understand that a little bit better. So what do you mean precisely? So I know that you've had life cycle assessments done, and do you claim that the entire system as a whole is carbon negative? What aspect of your business is carbon negative?
The cattle operation is carbon negative. And that number, that's not my opinion. That number exists. Those numbers exist, and it's on my website in a work done by Quantis, an environmental engineering firm. You can go to my website and look at it.
But so what does that look like? Let me be more precise in what I'm asking. So one aspect that I want to understand better is you say that your soil has now 5% carbon, right? That's something that's measurable. And is that something that you expect to continue going up as time goes on? Or do you get sort of diminishing returns? So what does the picture look like in terms of sequestration going down the line, moving forward from today?
So if the Qantas work shows that we sequester 3.5 pounds of carbon for every pound of beef we produce. That's what the work says, and it's you can look at. I'm pretty sure that, not pretty sure, I am sure that there is a maximum amount of carbon that we will be able to sequester in terms of percentage here, because it's a lot of oxidation going on, a lot of heat, a lot of moisture. So I don't think that, I don't know if 5.5% is the maximum or not. It might be. It might go to 7. I don't know. Certainly won't. I don't think it'll go to 10. But it can be deeper and deeper. You know, the work done by the environmental engineering firm was about 6 inches. So the core was about 6 inches. Well, the core could be 6 inches or 12 or 18, and I don't know if there's any limit to how deep the soil can be. I think that I've read about how deep the topsoils were in the Midwest when people started farming it, and it's become more and more shallow, more and more mineralized. It can be deeper and deeper as well.
I see. So a key part of the story is not just that you draw carbon into the soil, but because you're having less runoff, right? You have these, when you have a large amount of rain coming onto the property, you're not washing off your top layer. You can just keep building up. You suspect that you can keep building up year after year after year. And that's really how you're drawing in carbon over time.
I'm convinced that that's the case.
Yeah. And so another aspect is, so how is it, so you've gotten rid of pesticides and herbicides and all these things that other farmers use to kill the things on their farm. How do you get around not having those tools, right? You're somehow fighting with one arm behind your back in some sense. So how do you get around that aspect?
Well, first of all, let me say that we have gone without the tools, the technologies, the pesticides, chemical fertilizers. And it's always a little hard, like giving up any crutch. It's a little hard getting away from them, but once we're away from them, we're very glad we are. And there's a lot of examples I can give, but we used to spray insecticide on our cattle in the warm weather months. Every couple of weeks, we'd spray them. They'd be covered in flies, and we'd spray them, and it would kill them all. And over time, they'd build back up, and it was an expense. And spraying that insecticide was not healthy for the cattle. It was not healthy for those of us who were doing the spraying. It had a cost. I have not sprayed cows for flies in maybe 20 years, but close to 20 years. And the reason, and when I quit spraying my cows for flies, it was painful. I mean, it was painful for the cow, painful for me to watch the cow. But we don't have flies like that anymore. Are there flies out there? Yes. But when I quit spraying them for flies, I quit giving them wormers to kill internal parasites.
Mm-hmm.
When I quit giving them the wormers to kill internal parasites, the dung beetles returned.
Mm.
Dung beetles were, well, obviously they weren't extinct, but I didn't see them for 20 years. I saw them when I was a kid, and I didn't see them anymore. When I quit using wormer on the cattle, the dung beetles came back. The wormer would go through the cows, out the back end in feces, and the feces then would be poisonous to dung beetles. So the dung beetles went away. When I quit using wormer, dung beetle populations grew, and that took care of the fly problem because the flies would lay eggs in the manure.
Mm-hmm.
But if the dung beetles were in the manure, they would aerate it, so the flies were not nearly as bad a problem. So we part of what we did since World War II is look for technologies to handle these perceived problems. And they were highly efficacious. They did. They fixed those problems.
Mm-hmm.
But they created another problem. Now, I don't think anybody set out to create that, but I think that there are a lot of people making a lot of money with it today. I think that today, any perceived production problem we have in agriculture, there are technology companies that can find technologies that fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But they have unintended consequences that cause another problem that require another fix that's highly efficacious. But it causes another problem that causes another fix. And I don't think it's an accident anymore. I think that when we first, my dad's generation, later my generation, embraced these technologies to make production linear, agricultural production linear, we use these technologies. Most of them were warfare technologies post-World War II that got transitioned over into agriculture. But somewhere along the line, I think that really smart people figured out that, I can produce a technology that will solve a problem that farmers will pay me for to solve a problem. It'll create another problem that I can create another technology to sell to farmers. They'll fix that problem. It'll create another problem. And I think that's where we are. And I think that not only is it financially debilitating to farmers, but I think it's also causing incredible ecological problems that we're all having to deal with.
You can kind of see how farmers would step slowly into the position of an industrial feedlot, right, where they're just using all the tools at their disposal. One aspect, though, is now that people can see what you're doing, your next door neighbor, you said he still farms in the traditional or the industrialized way. Now that people can look across and see what you're doing, is anyone saying, I want to do the same thing? That makes sense. Why are people not picking up in a rapid manner what you're doing?
Well, what I am doing is not way more profitable than what my neighbors are doing. Mm-hmm. Farmers. Okay, let's talk about it in a minute. My friends and neighbors and relatives who still farm very industrially are wonderful people. They're great people. And they believe, and they're farming the way their dad, granddad, and maybe great-granddad farmed. And they're farming the way they learned how to farm at the University of Georgia or Auburn University or Florida, the University of Florida, land-grant colleges. And they're farming the way that the Department of Agriculture county agents tell them to farm.
Mhm.
They're farming the way that the big ag companies. I mean, there's nobody saying you ought not do that. This is what you ought to do.
Mhm.
And these guys feel good about what they're doing, and they're good people. And I am absolutely not critical of the farmers that are farming industrially. I used to farm industrially, and I could still be farming industrially.
Mhm.
And I'm not necessarily making a lot more money than those guys. We earlier in this conversation, we talked about the fact that there's more risk in what I do than there is in what they do. There's some years there's more upside potential. There's years there's more downside potential. It's not a financial no-brainer, an economic no-brainer to say, son, you should be farming like this. It's not like that.
Mhm.
And I should tell you this. When my dad was cowboy and I was cowboy, so we didn't communicate a lot about deep subjects. But my dad was an expert cattleman. I mean, he was just really good at it because that's all he had to be good at. His dad and his granddad had to be good pig farmers and good gardeners and good chicken farmers and good cattle farmers. They were very much generalists, whereas my dad and later me was a specialist. We were expert cattlemen, and there was pride in that. Today, on this farm, we raise, I think I told you, cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, vegetables, eggs, honey. And I don't know that I'm an expert in any of it. I'm very much the generalist. And I think that is a bit of a problem. And the way the educational system works is, we send our sons and daughters to land grant colleges, and they learn genetics from a professor that knows all there is to know about genetics, but doesn't know too much about animal nutrition or animal breeding. We learn soil fertility from a guy that knows, or gal that knows all there is to know about soil fertility. Probably doesn't know very much about entomology. So, we have evolved into, we've broken farming down into this group of specialities that we take a lot of pride, maybe arrogance in being so good at individual pieces of it that we lose sight of the whole thing. It's like going to a ball game, a baseball game. It's got a wooden fence, and you're watching the game through a slot in the wooden fence. So you can see what's going on third base, but you have no idea what's going on first or second or home plate. So, there's just a lot wrong with the way we do things, and it's very complicated to fix, complex to fix, and a lot of people, entities are making a lot of money as it is. One thing we hadn't talked about is we talked about the impact on the land and the impact on the animals. We hadn't talked about the impact on rural America, and that's very important. I am in the middle of Bluffton, Georgia, which is in the middle of white oak pasture. And it's in Clay County, Georgia, which I told you earlier it was the poorest county in America in 2020. And that is pure. And it used to be a thriving little, there was a concrete swimming pool right out this window that was built by my great uncle in 1920. Weren't many concrete swimming pools in rural South Georgia in 1920, but Bluffton had one. And it's in the poorest county in America now. And I can go on and on about the economic disparity between this part of the world now and this part of the world before World War II. And we literally have just the industrial commodity agricultural production system has impoverished rural America. A lot of money is being made on rural America. Not a lot of money is being made in rural America.
And that's because you don't need many people to operate the industrial system?
That's a big part of it. You don't need many people. And when the old post-slavery farming model was 40 acres on a mule.
Mm-hmm.
One family on 40 acres of land with one mule was a farming unit. And a family in that era could have been 6, 8, 10, 12 people, extended family, grandmama, granddaddy. Today, I don't know exactly what the number is, but I got neighbors that farm industrially and maybe 5, 6, 7,000 acres with 3 people, 2 of which are minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So that impoverishes our economy. Other things, buying equipment. We spend so much. Farmers spend so much money that leaves here immediately. You buy a tractor or pesticides, or the money doesn't stay here anymore.
I see. I hadn't even thought of that aspect.
So you can look online and see it, but there are all kinds of studies done by USDA that shows that the farmer gets something like 14 cents of the consumer dollar. Now that varies a lot if you're talking about eggs or oranges or pork, but I think it's something like 14 cents. So for every dollar that you spend at the grocery store, something like 14 cents goes back to the farmer. Now, White Oak Pastures, 100 cents of it goes back to the farm, back to Bluffton, Georgia. Now, White Oak Pastures is not incredibly profitable. It's year in, year out. It's not much more than a break-even-ish business. Certainly a very low return on equity for me. Mm-hmm. It's fine, but it is. It's factory shortage. But my payroll is $100,000 a week in Bluffton, Georgia. Again, the poorest county in America. We're the largest employer. We write payroll checks for over $100,000. Mm-hmm. Now, all that money stays here, or almost, by comparison, almost all of it stays here. So from I guess the point I'm making to you is I hope I've made the point that the way I farm is better on the animals. Mm-hmm. I hope I made the point that's better on the land. And I hope I'm now making the point it's better on the local rural economy.
Mm-hmm. So what do you lose then? I mean, it sounds like the main thing that you lose is you probably can't produce as much meat, and you yourself probably don't take as much of a paycheck.
I think what you lose is the consumer will pay a little more for the food. Mm-hmm. We don't spin off the costs. We talked about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, species driven to extinction. We talk about a lot of other things, but those are costs that are not incurred the way I farm. So the cost. I mean, I can't sell meat, milk as cheap as industrial farms, but I like to think I don't create the problems in industrial farm create. And I also like to think that I offer some benefits into this local, the land, the water, and the local economy.
Do you find, so this, maybe you don't want to go along these lines, but do you then find it hard to sell your product in the sense that, you have your steak, let's say, on the shelf somewhere, and that's competing against someone else's steak that's, let's say, 80, 70% of the cost, and the consumer doesn't necessarily know, right? They don't, someone who's not an expert, who doesn't know you, won't know the difference between those two steaks necessarily. So do you find it hard to move your product?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We sell nearly $30 million worth of product a year, 20-some million. And we sell it in 48 states. And that's not the way I want it to be. I don't want to sell product. I need to sell that amount of stuff because I've got that investment here. I've built USDA inspected red meat plant, the USDA inspected poultry plant, a lot of other infrastructure here. So I've got to do that much volume. I don't want to do it in 48 states. I want to do it, and I can't do it in Bluffton, Georgia. I can't. But I want to, I would like to think that from Atlanta, Georgia to Orlando, Florida would be plenty of market for me. But because it is more expensive and because there are less than enough people that are willing to pay the full price of production, they don't want to drive species into extinction and increase the size of the dead zone of the Gulf of Mexico and all these other things we talked about. We have to spread over a big area. No, it's not quite right. I almost said when I started this, it was not at a point while I was in this journey. At a point, I believed for a while that I was a early adapter in a new way of producing food that would catch traction and be what we did. And I liked that. I'm not trying to make this the biggest company it can be. We're bigger now than I intended to be and willing to shrink it, actually. But I don't know that I believe that anymore. Now I think we may just be a niche provider. And that's not as palatable to me, but it's okay. I can live with it. I mean, if there's a white oak pastures in every community, that's what I want. Not by the name white oak pastures privately.
An equivalent.
Yeah, equivalent. In every farm community in the country, that's what I would like to see. But if not, as long as I'm able to sell enough stuff to make my business work, maybe I'm just a niche provider. And that's not as palatable to me, but it's okay. I'm still able to do what I want to on my family, my employees, my land, my hours.
The industrial approach to farming, is it sustainable in the sense that, so you say that you have currently something around 5% carbon in your soil. Your next door neighbor who's farming in the old or the traditional approach, they have 1% or 0.5%. Does it really matter long term? Can we keep doing that? Or does the system eventually just completely collapse? In other words, is it okay to have 0.5% carbon? Can we just do that indefinitely or not?
No, the system will fail. Sooner or later, the system will fail. And I'm very sorry about that. I'm going to do all I can to insulate myself and my family and my employees from whatever that decline looks like. But, there's seldom much change without pain. There's seldom much change without pain. And the things we're doing now need to be changed, but I don't think we're going to do it until we feel pain. And when we feel pain, my first goal is to insulate myself and my people from it as much as I can. And then second is to hope that it's not any more than it has to be for everybody else. But I do think that sooner or later there will be change. I don't think a pendulum can swing but so far. And I think we're probably at the end of that.
You're very close to the land, so you can see things that are happening on your property that other people, someone who lives in a city their whole life, they probably don't have a good intuition for what would break first. Do you have any intuition for that? So on an industrial farm, where you're just driving the land away through it's washing into the ocean, your topsoil, and you have all these other aspects that are problematic. What is the weakest link there? What's the thing that's going to break first?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I don't know that. I know that we have built this food production system purely focused on economy. That's a vertical up, and you can't go vertically up forever. At some point, it'll be the end of the rope, and I don't know what can go first. I don't know that.
Mm-hmm. So back to the question about your neighbor, right? So I asked, are other people jumping on board and doing what you're doing? And the reason why I'm asking this is because you've in some sense absorbed a lot of the costs, right? You've built a slaughter plant or somewhere to process the animals. You've dealt with, say, various pests that you would otherwise deal with pesticides. You now have an approach to all these different problems. So you've done a lot of the hard work. In my imagination, it would be much easier now today for your neighbor to come across the way of doing things, because he could share, let's say, your processing plant, or he could, he or she could run things in parallel alongside you and learn from you. Why haven't you absorbed enough cost that it looks palatable to your neighbor? I mean, it sounds like you have a fairly well-oiled machine.
Well, we actually formed a 501c3 nonprofit for education. It's called CFAR. The acronym is CFAR, Center for Agricultural Resilience. And we hired an executive director, and we put on training classes here specifically to teach what we've learned. Not that we know it all. We do not, but we've learned a lot. And we operate this nonprofit to teach other people, because we do want other people to emulate what we've done. Mm-hmm. And it's reasonably successful. I mean, we put on these seminars, and people come to it, and people learn, and people go home and implement what they've learned. Is it growing like wildfire? No, it's not, for the economic reasons that we discussed earlier. But there's some that is spreading to some extent, and I should tell you that the way it's spreading is not necessarily other white oak pastures, soil operations all over the country. It's a little different for that. It's more private subsistence kind of farms, family, and I think that's great. I mean, that's fantastic. The white oak pastures model that I've tried to build here has worked. It's not been easy, but it's worked. But it's not necessarily the optimum size that it needs to be. It's what worked for me. In retrospect, looking back, I was a very industrial monocultural cattle producer, and I had my idea of scale, how big things needed to be. And when I changed the operation to more what it is today, I still thought it had to operate at the scale that I had carved out, and my dad had carved out as an industrial cattleman. When I didn't tell you this, but when I was growing the business, I hit a real wall in terms of having my animals processed, slaughtered. Mm-hmm. So I tried a lot of different things, but ultimately I had to build slaughter here on the farm and spent several $1 million doing that. And that required me to go scale up even more, because I had to have enough animals to operate that slaughter capacity I put in. So when an individual is considering this sort of food production, they don't necessarily need to say, well, I need to do it just like White Oak Pastures did, or just like anybody. There's so many considerations you've got to make, and there's nothing wrong with operating at a very, very small scale. There's nothing wrong with it.
What was behind the decision to open up the plant exactly? So you said you were having trouble having your animals slaughtered. To me, that's a massive expense to bring onto yourself, several $1 million when you're running a small operation. So why were you not able to sell the cows you were developing in a regenerative fashion, whereas it was easy before when you were doing things along the industrial route?
I mean, it was hard then, it's hard now. The evolution of the meat business in this country since World War II has been consolidation. Little bitty, small packing plants, hometown packing plants, individually owned, went broke. They weren't anymore. When I was a kid, I'm 70 years old, but I can still remember when every little town had a little slaughter plant here. They weren't doing very well, and ultimately went out of business because big meat companies were so much more efficient, and they still are. And so when I got ready to go in this business, I still found one or two of those little privately owned slaughter plants available, but they'd say, I can do 2 a week. Good. And I found another one, he said, I can do 5 a week. Good. And then maybe I found another one who could do 6 a week. That still wasn't enough. So I started selling. I told you my timing was so fortunate, and I started selling my product, and I couldn't get enough of it processed. I could raise them and I could sell them, but the processing was not good. And I never wanted to build a processing plant. And today I can tell you I do not enjoy owning and operating processing plants. I got 2, one for red meat and one for poultry, but it's my least favorite part of this business. But it's a necessary part of the business. Consumers don't buy cows and hogs and chickens. They buy beef and pork and lamb and poultry. It's got to be processed. So that's got to happen, and that's part of the consideration. But today there are beginning to be some processing available around.
So can I ask, was the regenerative aspect of your business in some sense by chance, in the sense that you were forced for economic reasons to build your own processing plant on site, and now you have waste coming from that facility, which then you have to take care of? It sounds like you started with animal ethics and then you ended up with a much larger program than you ever thought you would to start with.
Absolutely. And we're still figuring it out. My processing plants generate about 9 tons a day of packing plant waste. That'd be eviscerate, gut fill, the non-marketable bones, heads, feathers, And we compost that and spread it on the land, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful. I love it. But when I built my processing plants, I didn't say I'll get some great fertilizer from it. That evolved, and things continue to evolve here. There are things that we do today that I didn't think about doing that yesterday. And we find, I still own 100% of the business, but I certainly don't run 100% of the business. We've got about 170 employees, and I own it, and I have what I call the board of directors, 7 employees here, 2 children, 2 in-laws, 2 family members, and me, the directors. And I said two non-family members, so I thought this almost, and they're not. And they manage about 25 managers who manage 150 employees. So it's all these wonderful things we do, and if I say wonderful, if that's arrogant, it's arrogant. I can't help it, and I'm proud of it. But it's not on me. It's other talented people that are doing these great things.
One aspect that you mentioned was that so your cows are they're fed on grass, right? So they roam your pastures and they eat the grass that's grown there. But you said you have to bring in feed for other animals that you have on the property. So at the end of the day, what are you bringing in and what's going out?
We bring in food for the non-ruminants. That would be the poultry and the pigs. I hope one day to do that myself, but I currently don't have enough land, so we buy that. And that I don't know that we're necessarily all that carbon negative on that part of our business. I hope we are. That work has not been done. It's certainly not as carbon negative as the ruminant operation, the cows, sheep, and goats. But that's the way it is. So we buy feed from a non-GMO feed mill here in Georgia.
But so why do you need these other animals, right? Why couldn't you just run with cattle and grass? Why do you need the goats? Why do you need the geese? Why do you need the various different fowl and so on?
Well, we talked about the fact that we do not want to be a monoculture. Nature abhors a monoculture. You don't have monocultures in nature. Not nowhere. So having these other animals has a role. There's certain plant species that cattle eat, and some they don't eat. And some of those sheep will eat, and then some of the sheep won't eat, and some of those goats will eat. And then the poultry and the pigs all have impacts on the land that's beneficial. And with all of them, you can over impact it and it can be detrimental, but managed properly, it's beneficial. So I would miss having, even though and by the way, here's a good example. I don't make money on my poultry. I can't sell my poultry for enough money to be profitable. I know there are people that do, and I'm proud for them, but I simply have not. I lose money raising poultry, but I want to raise poultry because they have an impact on the land. That chicken manure and the scratching and pecking and moving them around, it has a positive impact. And my customers that eat my beef and pork and lamb want chicken and duck and turkey. So I won't have it for them.
I see. So you're able to be more of a one-stop shop because you're selling everything that the customer wants. But so it was then, if I understand correctly, somehow for economic reasons, in the sense that if you wanted to run without pesticides, if you wanted to run without herbicides, then it was necessary to make your whole operation sustainable, that you had to have other species on board, they had different tasks that they were performing on the land. Is that the case?
Tasks they're performing on land. Could we do without hogs? Yeah. Could we do without chickens? Yeah. Is this ecosystem better for having hogs and chickens in it? Yeah.
So back to the main argument that people make here. So people will say that livestock are negative for the environment, right? This is one of the key arguments that people bring when it comes to whether or not you're a vegetarian, vegan, whether you eat meat. People say the most damaging thing that we can do as an individual almost is, they say, having children, eating meat, travel. They have this list of things, but eating meat is key among them. What do you say to that?
You're wrong. I mean, it's wrong. I mean, it's incredible to me. It's incredible to me how much traction the militant vegan vegetarian movement has gotten with that argument. So let me say this. I have friends, acquaintances, relatives who are vegetarians or vegans, and it's fine. It's fine. If a person decides they don't want to eat meat, I am absolutely fine with it. I abhor the militant vegetarian, militant vegan movement, which believes no one should eat meat. They think they should be able to make that decision for all of us. And I reject it. But those militant vegetarians and vegans have done an incredible job convincing just about everybody that livestock is inherently damaging to the environment, and that's not right. Industrial production, monocultural industrial production is bad. And they have capitalized on that and made a huge percentage of the population believe that all livestock production is bad. And that's not right. It's really, if you know much about the way the ecology works, it's just astounding that they've been able to put points on the board as much as they have with that flimsy argument. It's not right.
So for the average consumer though, so people who live in Bluffton or people who have access to what you're selling, in Europe, I can't buy what you're selling. Maybe there's a local farmer that I can find who farms like you in a regenerative fashion. But for the average consumer that's buying meat from the supermarket, is the argument correct for that person?
Restate the question.
So I think it's wonderful what you're doing, right? But as you say, you're a small producer, and the average person is going to be buying meat from a large industrial farm. That's just the way the world currently works, is that's where the meat is coming from for the average consumer. So is the argument correct? It sounds like the argument is correct for that person. And so is there a path that, let's say you weren't on a farm and let's say you were living in the city and you consume meat. So as a consumer, if you're concerned about the ethics, society, and environmental destruction of industrial farming, what path would you take as a consumer who's disconnected from the land?
Well, you said you accurately describe the way it currently works. That's not the way it has to work. Mm-hmm. Those consumers could find a producer that produces meat better, maybe not optimally, but better. And then that consumer and that producer can work together to make it more and more optimal until things work the way they're supposed to. Is it as easy as stopping by the supermarket on the way home from work? Is it as cheap as that? Probably not. But is it better for the planet? If you care about the planet, it's probably what you should be doing.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the ethics here, because this is something else I find quite interesting. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here. I think I read that you had your processing plant designed by Temple Grandin. Is this the case? So what made you decide to go that route? Because she's renowned for developing plants which are ethical, let's say. So was it more expensive? What was the decision process? What were you able to achieve on the ethics side of your entire operation?
So when I hired Temple Grandin to design my plant, she was not nearly as famous as she is today. This is 25 years ago, I guess. And it just so happened that I had met her at some meetings somewhere. We weren't buddies, but I had met her and was impressed by her. And I said, I don't even know that she was in the consulting business when I hired her. She may have been, but I had her contact information, and I called her, and she's not real easy to communicate with. And she's autistic, and in fact, while I was dealing with her, when she got somebody in her employ to do her communication for her. When I started out, I was talking to her. In the process, she had hired a guy that became the intermediary between she and I. But I just wanted my plant to be the best it could be. And I knew I didn't know how to do that. And she was the only person I had met at that time that seemed to have that skill set and the confidence that she knew what she was doing. So I hired her. I think I paid her $10,000 to design it for me. And she did. And it's the best $10,000 I've ever spent, if that's what the number was. It was a long time ago. But the animals flow through there like water through a pipe. We don't have to beat on them and hit them and poke them and yell at them. They just go, when we open the gate, they walk through it.
Mm-hmm. I suppose that's also because they're living very low stress lives in general, right? They're probably not scared of you on the paddock in the same way that other industrial. When you were running 25 years ago, were your cattle scared of you, or how do you see the behavior differences today in your current operation as compared to back then?
That's a great question. And absolutely, we used to use, horses and dogs and whips, and, it was every day was a rodeo. And today we move the cattle every day. And this farm, this 3,200 acres here is chopped up into about 150, maybe a little over 150 paddocks that are permanently chopped up, that are about 30 acres, 20, 30 acres apiece. And every day we move the cattle, and they know if I'm in this paddock, tomorrow I'm going out that gate to that paddock. So every morning when we go to the paddock, they're standing at the gate, and we open it. Our biggest herd is right now. It's 1,000 mama cow, a little over 1,000, I think 1,006 or 8, and 700 something calves. And it takes about 6 minutes for them to go through a 16-foot gate. I mean, when you open the gate, you got to get out of the way. So there is no driving and herding and in the plant. We take the animals, we slaughter about 20 or 25 cows a day. We take the animals up there the day before, the evening before. So they got water, but not food. Let them get emptied out. And it's very quiet, very, very quiet. Now, we make no mistake, life is lost. Mm-hmm. 20 or 25 animals are killed every day. But I think it's part of the natural system. I think that when there were buffalo roaming and wolves behind them, some animals lost their life every day. So I don't think this is very different from the way civilization evolved.
And how many people do you feed then? How many people do you support with that 25 cattle a day and the rest of your production? Do you have any idea of those numbers?
How many people eat that food?
Yeah. How many people do you support off your farm in total?
Your employees? Or?
No. So how much food are you producing?
Well, 25. Of course, we're also killing chicken. In the other building, we're killing chickens, and I mean, I could calculate, but I have not done it.
Let me say where I want to take this question. So at some point, I want to ask you about whether or not your system is sustainable, in the sense that if we ran America, let's say, off regenerative farming, could we do it? Right? Is there enough land? Is there enough space? Can we feed the nation off your system, off your way of doing things? So as part of that calculation, I'm wondering, how many do you feed off your piece of land that you have access to?
I could do that calculation for you. I mean, a 1,000-pound cow produces about 400 pounds of edible meat, and we could do the calculation. I don't think it has much value, but we could do the calculation. But the question you ask is very, very important. The question you ask is, it gets to the carrying capacity of this planet. And the fact is, this planet has a carrying capacity. There are a number of people that can consume an existence, and it can be over the carrying capacity. And I don't know what that carrying capacity is. None of us do, because we've been for a long time, we've been living beyond our carrying capacity, using fossil fuels and whatnot, depleting the soil. We've also been wasting food. We may not be beyond the carrying capacity if we were operating responsibly, but there is a carrying capacity, and none of us want to think about that, but it's just a fact. You can't keep adding more and more and more people in perpetuity. It'll be okay. That's not going to happen.
So in some sense, we're on borrowed time when we're using the industrial approaches.
Well, we're on borrowed time if we're going to use, but we're also wasting a lot of food. I mean, I think I advocate for both. I advocate for getting away from these industrial production methods we're using, but I also advocate against wasting so much food.
You mentioned right at the start that you're not anti-science, you're not anti-technology. So one thing that I want to know is, are you running things as your grandfather and great-grandfather were? Exactly. What is the difference between what you're doing today and what your grandfather was doing? What technologies do you still maintain?
I guess computers and drones, and I have gone back to using one pharmaceutical inoculation against a disease called blackleg. I used to use all sorts of technical pharmaceuticals, and we don't use those anymore. I am absolutely not opposed to technology. I'm opposed to misplaced technology. I'm opposed to using technology to solve another problem that creates another problem. I use another technology to solve, and so on and so on and so on. And again, the way I run this farm today, I did not set out to emulate what my great-grandfather and grandfather did. I noticed that it was evolved to emulating what they did. That was never a goal of mine. I mentioned to you earlier, they operated without refrigeration, without internal combustion motors, without USDA inspection. There's a lot of things that we have today that actually make the process work better. And I certainly don't want to go back to a purely 1800s production model. But I don't want to use every technology that's out there, regardless of what unintended consequence it creates. And I've seen with my own eyes that a lot of these technologies do create unforeseen problems that requires another technology to fix, that results in another unintended failure.
So I want to move towards the end of the conversation, and there's just a few things that I want to touch on or give you a better chance to sort of fill out. And one of those is the topic of greenwashing, right? So I asked you, is it hard to move your product, right? Because people don't necessarily know what your product is as compared with an industrialized piece of meat. So what is greenwashing, and how does it actually impact your operations, your bottom line?
I think the greenwashing is a form of marketing that occurred when big food companies started recognizing the fact that there's a consumer, a small but existing consumer backlash to increased technology. And what big food did is become just adept at talking about the way they do it differently without doing a whole lot different. Poultry, this branded all vegetarian feed is like an attribute, but chickens are not vegetarians. Chickens are carnivore. There's a lot of things we could talk about, but the way big food, I mean, they've got super talented people that I'm sure make an incredible amount of money using great talent and skill to talk about what they do in a way that is pleasing to people, and they're very good at
it. So my understanding is that there's a desire from the population. People want to eat ethical meat, and people want to save the planet. That's what they want, right? And I suppose that creates opportunity for someone like yourself, right? There's a market that's generated from the desires of the population to be a little bit better about how they consume. And my understanding is that opportunity is in some sense squashed by larger agricultural companies who sort of remove the opportunity that you should have had, right, for your shelf space. Is this what's happening? Do you see this as something that really destroys opportunity for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the way you describe it is actually spot on. When we were early at the party, and we started marketing grass-fed beef. It was fine. I don't think big meat companies were jealous of the very small amount of stuff we were selling. But I think as it has moved forward, the movement has grown a little bit. It's still a small movement, still a small percentage of the total. That big meat has made changes. So I can give you a number of examples. The best one I can think of is prior to 2015, product of the USA was in relation to meat, beef, meant the animal was born, raised, and slaughtered in the United States of America. In 2015, they changed the rule, intentionally made a rule change so that product of the USA meant value was added in this country. You can be born, raised, and slaughtered in 28 different countries in the world, maybe more than that. At that time, I think it was 28. And that was about the time that the market for grass-fed beef was starting to develop appreciably. And big meat companies wanted to bring in grass-fed beef, and they wanted to label it product of the USA, but they couldn't under the existing rule, so they changed the rule. It's pretty strong, isn't it? So now it's proposed to change it back, and I think they gave them until January of 26 to do it, and I don't know if it'll happen or not. But there's just a lot of changes that have been brought about because the movement has been strong. and still a lot of things still all right. You know, there's a lot of confusion about what is a free range chicken.
Mm-hmm. So along these lines, if you just look at the trajectory of farming in the United States, right? You're fourth generation, your grandchildren will be sixth generation. Your farm has been in the family for a long time, right? But from what I understand, this is not the usual story, right? People get old, they leave the land, they sell their farm to some big interest somewhere, and less of the land in the United States is run by people like yourself, right? These large farms where people are actually farmers. They're not. What would you call someone who runs an industrial farm? Would you call them a farmer?
I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, I guess it depends on the circumstances. That's too broad a question for me to answer.
So what was it that's special about your story? Why is the land able to remain in your family, whereas most families aren't able to hold on to their land? They slowly leave the farming business.
I would speculate it's because of the way farmers have evolved to handle inheritance. I think that my father was an only child, and I'm an only child. So there was, and my father wanted to farm, and I wanted to farm. So there was a perfect opportunity for that transition. I have three daughters, only two of whom chose to come back, and I will leave the farm to those two.
Mm-hmm.
I've got, as I said earlier, 7 grandchildren, and I won't be here for that transition, but I have urged my daughters to leave the farm to those who want to come back and actively participate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what it takes to keep farms in families. I don't know too much about the old European way of inheritance, but my understanding is that the eldest son got the estate,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some things right about that, some things are wrong about that. What's right about it is leaving the whole estate undivided to one or a small number of people. I think has strength. Now the eldest son, that was cowardice. I mean, it should have been leave it to those who want to come back and creatively maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope I've done that. I mean, I'm sure that my two daughters that I'm leaving the farm to, they're in their 30s. Both of them are married. Both of them got children. Both of them are passionate about the farm. Both of them are very deeply involved with the farm. I'm sure it's good for that generation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not they're able to perpetuate it over another generation remains to be seen. I don't think it's necessary that, I don't think it's necessary that farms stay in the same family for many generations. I think it's fine, but I don't see many businesses around that are 5, 6, 7 generations. A few, but not many.
So let's wrap up with the final question, which is, what do you wish consumers knew? If there's one thing that you wish consumers living in a city, they never set foot on a farm, someone who has no interaction with animals directly, no interaction with agriculture, what do you wish people knew about the food that ends up on their plate?
I wish they knew more about how it was produced so they could make their own decision about what they want to eat. If consumers know that their meat or vegetables or grains or uber industrially produced through a heavy dependence upon technology, and they're fine with it, that's okay. That's fine. But I wish they knew the truth. So let me say this. I don't want anybody on this planet going to bed hungry. If the only way we can feed people is to produce super technological food that has unintended consequences on the planet and the animals and the people. That's what we got to do. Now, I don't want anybody hungry, but there are a lot of people that could afford to eat food that's raised in a manner that is not bad for the planet, not bad for the animals, not bad for the rural economy of people that are producing it. And I wish those people knew specifically what's going on, what they contribute to when they eat food that's raised properly, and what they are responsible for when they eat food that's not raised properly.
Well, Will Harris, it's been a pleasure.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.